Hi, this is the lecture for Chapter 12, CCAF in Interactive Instruction. So, CCAF, what is that? Context, challenge, activity, and feedback. So this chapter really tries to bring everything together: the design, the subject matter, the vision, the objectives, the multimedia, and the technology. It all comes together to enable changes to behavior, to make some change to a performance, hopefully successful change. So he has 3 bullet points of what the heart of this chapter is: to explore the differences between mechanical interactivity and instructional interactivity, to provide a framework for thinking about instructional interactivity, and to help designers create the kind of interactivity that works to engage learners, builds needed competencies, and provides value in e-learning that justifies the investment. So I really like this line that he has here: interactivity is the supernatural power of e-learning. Right? It has the power it has dual powers that together are capable of achieving the ultimate goal of success through performance improvement. So instructional interactivity invokes thinking. So if you design something properly, interactivity will help make us think. Thinking then leads to understanding. Understanding can lead to increased capabilities and the preparation you need to perform better. Instructional interactivity requires doing, performing. So rehearsed performance leads to skill development. So you really need to hone in on instructional interactivity invokes thinking. Instructional interactivity requires doing. Okay, so effective learning environments employ interactivity. So if all we do is a verbal learning, so if all we do is talk to somebody and they're listening, that information, that learning dissipates quickly. They don't really internalize it, right? So if we add in this whole idea of instructional interactivity and rehearsal, we can move it from them just passively listening to actively internalizing. Okay, so here's a definition: instructional interactivity, interaction that actively stimulates the learner's mind to do those things that improve ability and readiness to perform effectively. So, I mean, that's a definition, but how do we get that done? Well, that's where this CCAF comes in. So, let's take a look at that. Context, challenge, activity, and feedback. Context, the framework and the conditions that are in the training. Challenge, a stimuli to provide an action within the context. And activity is a physical response to the challenge, and then feedback is a reflection of the action. So in this chapter, he's got some examples, and I thought this one was pretty good. You have an HR, right? So in this training, the challenge is to identify the most immediate safety threat. So if you look back here, if you go to each of these, you can like almost listen in on a little thought bubble. So here it's saying roll your mouse over the animated employee to read small bits of their conversation. So you're asking someone to move around this office and listen in or listen to the conversations. Okay, so the challenge then is to identify which of these employees is the most immediate safety threat. So that's the challenge. listen to these conversations, listen or look at the behaviors, and figure out who is the most immediate safety threat. So the activity is then that you listen, you decide who's making the most concerning comments, and you move that employee into your office. So you're going to physically drag that employee into the office. And then when you're in the office, a feedback is going to come up, whether or not this is the most highest level threat or not. And so, this is one of the areas where the feedback can really provide some clarity on why it was a good choice or why there's probably a better choice. So while this employee is clearly irritated, it's not clear this person is a threat, right? Please try and find. And then here's where you get feedback on the right person, right? So I thought that was kind of and not super, it's not a whole lot of steps to it. It's like a simple process. Move around this room, listen to the conversations, figure out who you think is the most concerning, move that person into the office, and see if you identified correctly the right spot. So he goes on here to talk about the analysis of the example, right? So they go through a comparative step to rank, right? And they symbolically move around the office. Good supervisors are active listeners. That's a good, when a security problem is identified, face-to-face encounters, when they ask probing questions, focuses on action and consequences. So those are all really positive things. And he does mention here that really no design is perfect. And this is one of the feedback could be more intrinsic and possibly more effective. For example, if the learner mistakenly identified a lower risk comment and took that individual to the office, the person representing a greater safety threat might actually carry out some violence. So you might want to build into that feedback, this is wrong, and while you're wrong, the real person did, shot up the office or whatever. So to see that there is some negatives to figuring out the wrong thing. And it's better to do that on paper in training, right? So then he goes through a railroad safety, right? And I'm not going to go through that with you, but it's kind of cool, right? So animation where they throw up different like for CDL, for commercial drivers, they throw up different areas that could cause a truck driver to have a challenge or need to react. And so go through, they got a ticket, so it's kind of, here's some outcomes that are bad. So read through that. And then we've talked about these things before, but this is kind of pulling them all together. So context provides the framework and conditions that make the interaction relevant and meaningful to the learner. So you need to set the scene, so to speak. You need to tell the trainer, the trainee, why they're doing this. What's the point? How is it going to fit into the bigger world? Here's what you need. Here's the setting the stage. The challenge is stimuli to exhibit effective behavior. In its simplest and often least effective form, the challenge is a question the learner has to answer. In a more complex and usually more effective setting, stimuli can be such things as interaction on a control panel, service complaints, on and on. You can read these, right? Click next to go on is not a stimulus for instructional interactivity, unless you're trying to tell somebody how to move to the next screen. But you have 10 minutes before the patient's heart will give out can be an effective stimuli. So you want to start kind of thinking outside the box there. So activity. Activity is the physical gesture or what they actually have to do and the learner's response to the context and to the challenge. It could be a physical skill, a mental skill, whatever. They need to demonstrate abilities, ask. So whatever we're doing for this activity, the learner needs ways to communicate their decision, to demonstrate their abilities, ask for help, test their solutions, and state answers, right? Just making a learner do something doesn't comprise an instructional interaction. Very good interfaces are themselves a delight to use. Their value to the learning process goes beyond just efficiency and the machine-recognized gesture. They can also help learners see and understand more fully many kinds of relationships, such as a part of, an example of, or a complement to. Right? So really that's a big area there. And then the last thing is feedback. Feedback acknowledges learners' activities and provides information about the effectiveness of their decision and actions. And it's the formation of meaning, creating understanding. It's the very process of drawing relationships. The process of learning uses rehearsal to strengthen the forming relationship for later recall and application. So here is an example of a cognitive map. So the instructional designer's challenge is to devise a feedback that will provide will provide to be the most helpful to learners in their efforts to identify, to clarify, and to strengthen functional relationships. Okay. Good feedback reflects the different outcomes of specific actions. And so once again, it's work, right? But if the work is done, then it can really be a powerful training and can produce performance changes. The simple presence of the four components doesn't create effective learning interactions. It's the nuances of each component individually and the way that they integrate and support the effectiveness of the other components that lead to success. So we've got this horrible green. So we've got each of ours, and here is a strong and a weak pair for each. So let's just look at a couple. Context simulates performance environments. Perfect. That's great. Simulates a traditional classroom environment or no identifiable environment at all. Okay, so they don't have the context of where they're doing this. A challenge puts learners at some risk, such as having to start over if they make too many mistakes. Presents little or no risks by either revealing the correct answer after a mistake is made or using such structures. No, try again, right? Activity asks the learner to justify their decision before feedback is given. Learners are allowed to back up and change responses at any point. Facilitate lucky guesses and make no effort to differentiate between lucky guesses and well-reasoned decisions, right? So you can start to see the strong versus the weak here. So we definitely want to head towards the strong side of this chart. The elusive essence of good interactivity. So it would be helpful if all the necessary attributes of good interactions could be boiled down to a single guiding principle or even a single checklist. Even if imperfect, if the essence were easily communicated and widely understood, e-learning would be far better than it is today. So for this reason, the author continued to search for some kind of a checklist or creating. And so he has a 3-point checklist, this table 12.2. Good interactions are purposeful in the mind of the learner, right? So you have to put on that learner hat and understand why this is of value, right? Second one, the learner must apply genuine, authentic skills and knowledge. So this is that whole, you don't really want them to just guess, right? They must be calibrated to the learner's abilities, readiness, needs, and it should be as close to on-the-job performance as possible. And then feedback is intrinsic, right? It demonstrates the ineffectiveness or risks of poor responses and the value of good. So this table 12.2 is super important. So then he talks about pseudo-interaction, presentation versus instruction. A beautiful presentation is certainly worth more than an ugly one, but even superb presentation aesthetics don't convert a presentation into instruction or pronouncements into interactivity. Okay, so got another presentation, and what we really want was interactivity. So let's just look at this. Learner differences are minimal. Learners are diverse in their ability to understand the content, right? Errors are harmless. Errors are injurious, costly, or difficult to remedy. So this is when you would use a presentation, and this is when you would want to use interactivity, right? If errors are harmless, if it's, if it doesn't harm anyone, you can just present. If the errors are injurious, costly, or difficult, you need to include interactivity, right? So navigation versus interactivity. So navigation is just moving somebody from one place to another, right, to get information. But because it requires input, sometimes people confuse it with interactivity, and it's not. It's really navigation. It gets you from here to here, back there, forward, whatever. It gets you through the system. It's not doing actual interactivity. Okay, so let's go on. See here, you guys can read through that. All right, so question answering activity is just that, question answering, regardless of whether it's done with paper or pencil or computer. It doesn't really have any of that higher level mental process, and it's the same whether you're dragging or typing letters or clicking. Just because it's sophisticated on electronic device doesn't mean that learning is going to happen any more than if they did, right? So here's 5 interaction styles, but the difference among is significant. Okay, so binary choice via key press, binary choice versus drag and drop, still nothing more. Binary choice versus some text. Binary choice versus buttons. Oops. And, right, some learning occurs from repeatedly answering. At the very low end is relying on questioning. If the learner casually guesses the answer to get the right one, then it's no more effective than if they had the answers at the end of the chapter. It doesn't create a memorable event, and it will more than likely not provide any change in performance. So you just want to watch that. So instructional interactivities and mechanical interactivities are two different things. Mechanical interactivity involves input gestures such as clicking the mouse or pressing enter, and a computer will respond and display. Instructional interactivity actively stimulates the learner's mind to do and improve the ability and readiness to perform. So instructional interactivities are characterized being purposeful in the mind of the learners. Learners see value in what they're doing, right? They're communicated why this is important. Requiring the learner to perform authentic, that's the word right there, man, authentic skill as they would expect to do after training is complete. Intrinsic feedback. So those three things that were back here in that table, right? That's the three big things. All right. Thank you.